Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Kentucky Congressman Andy Barr is our guest for the full program this week. It's been a busy time in Washington and in the Bluegrass for the Republican who represents the 6th Congressional District. He has been a strong proponent of repealing and replacing the 2010 Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. The House passed a bill, but it went down to defeat in the Senate, as you're surely aware of. Also, despite protests at his own town hall meetings, many in Kentucky also gained coverage after the Medicaid expansion. Barr says that the problems with Obamacare are too troubling to overlook. He also supports simplifying the tax code and lowering the tax rates. That too may get strong pushback. How has the world of Washington changed since Donald Trump became president? We'll get the congressman's take. Barr was first elected in 2012. Two major candidates have filed for the Democratic nomination. State Senator Reggie Thomas and retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath want to challenge next year, and National Democrats are openly targeting Republican Barr's seat. Congressman Andy Barr joining us for Kentucky Newsmakers, and we welcome you back. Thanks for being here.
Great to be with you again.
This is a recess for Congress, for the House at least, and but you indicate there's a possibility you could be called back.
Well, our majority leader has told us that we could be called back to Washington within 72 hours if the Senate were to send us a health care bill. We don't think that's likely. My wife, Carol, always laughs when they call it recess because it's really a work period. We come home and it's a district work period where we get a chance to spend time with our constituents. We had the Small Business Administration and their Office of Advocacy in Lexington this week, and we listened to a lot of small businesses voice concern about the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
Well, I'm sure it is difficult to get time to be in the district and to meet with your constituents regularly. The health care debate, Congressman, has consumed America for months, certainly Washington, as we've watched from outside the Beltway. The House passed a repeal and replace bill, but then every version that came up in the Senate failed. Senator McConnell has said it's time to move on. Is repeal still your priority?
Well, look, I mean, Obamacare and the problems associated with the Affordable Care Act, they're not going away. I mean, they're with us. And I get it. This is a tough issue because health care is a very personal issue. It affects every one of us. Every one of our families have had a loved one or themselves affected by cancer or diabetes, especially in Kentucky where we have a higher incidence of chronic illness. My own family, with my sister who was diagnosed with arthritis at a young age. She is the poster child of a pre-existing condition. Crohn's disease, whatever it may be, every family in America faces difficult health care challenges.
Why not fix what's wrong? Why is it so important that the entire act be repealed when there are so many parts that people agree with?
Well, you know, the American Health Care Act that we did pass in the House did preserve protections for people with pre-existing conditions. In fact, multiple layers of protection for people with pre-existing conditions. I wouldn't have voted for it if it didn't protect people with pre-existing conditions like my sister. It kept dependents on their parents' health care plans until 26, a very popular provision. But what the American Health Care Act did do was address some of the failures of Obamacare. And Obamacare is a failing law. Premium escalation, premium inflation is still a huge problem. Premiums in Kentucky increased 27% last year alone. The only health insurers available to Kentuckians in the individual market, those insurers announced 30 to 35% premium increases this year. Choices are going down in Kentucky. A full half of the counties in Kentucky only have 2 choices if you're in the individual market, and in the other half only 1, which means effectively people have no choice of health insurance company in Kentucky. And then, as I said before, we continue to get inundated by small business owners who tell us about how difficult the employer mandate is for them. And some small businesses in my constituency have told me that it's fundamentally changed the relationship between employer and employee. It used to be that employers would offer health benefits to their workers as a way to compete for labor, for quality labor. Now there's an adversarial relationship. And Obamacare, many of the small businesses will tell you in central Kentucky, Obamacare has been the most significant discourager of work. and it has not been able to get people. I was just at a manufacturer yesterday in Winchester, and the same thing. They have a difficult time obtaining labor. The labor supply issues are very, very challenging right now. Obamacare is contributing to that. I have one other story really quickly from Fleming County, a small feed company, a growing company, 49 employees. They want to grow. They want to create more jobs. They can't because of the employer mandate. So these problems with Obamacare are not going away. And so it's not a matter of if the Affordable Care Act is going to be repealed or changed. It's a matter of when.
What floor do you support for people who would be gainfully employed, but then say that they could not afford to buy health insurance if it is not provided by their health care employer, or at least some of it provided by the employer?
Well, one of the great disappointments of the fact that we didn't get a bill back from the Senate yet is that we had some really important reforms that would help allow people with pre-existing conditions who are uninsured access affordable, high-quality health insurance. The sad irony of Obamacare is that many people who are newly insured or people who are thrown off their high-quality job-based insurance and forced into the high-deductible exchange plans or Medicaid, sadly, they can't get the health care that they need to treat the chronic illnesses or the pre-existing conditions that they had. Medicaid reimburses providers at only 40% of the cost of care. So many doctors in Central Kentucky, particularly specialists, say we can't even participate in Medicaid. So access to a Medicaid card, access to nominal coverage, access to a waiting line, that's not access to true health care. And so what we did in the American Health Care Act is we grandfathered people who were in the expanded Medicaid population. We held people harmless, but we gave them something better, which was refundable tax credits, even for those folks who don't have any taxable federal income tax liability. They could get a refundable tax credit to go anywhere, whether it's on an exchange or off an exchange, and get the plan that's right for them and get better high quality plans that have broader networks, better choices of physicians and specialists, and actually get the care that they need to take care of them.
So this is an important point. You do support and would only support a bill that would continue to provide the Medicaid coverage to the more than 400,000 Kentuckians who have gotten health insurance as a result of this expansion?
Well, one of the great features of our replacement bill is that it addressed the Medicaid crisis, which is unsustainable and is bankrupting, pose a huge risk of bankrupting not only Kentucky, but the country, because the Medicaid expansion is unsustainable in the states and nationally. And not only that, the way Obamacare Medicaid expansion is set up, it actually discriminates against the traditional Medicaid population. The traditional Medicaid population are the truly indigent, the poor in our communities, the dual eligible elderly, and individuals with disabilities. Under the current federal state cost share under Medicaid, Kentucky gets reimbursed about 70%, which is higher than the average state, 70% for that traditional Medicaid population. On the expanded Medicaid population, able-bodied, work-capable adults above the poverty line, the Commonwealth is reimbursed, and other states reimbursed at 100% down to 90%. So here's the cruel irony of Obamacare. It discriminates against the very people who need our safety net protection most of all: the disabled, the elderly, children, and people who live below the poverty line. The innovation, the entitlement reform that we offered in the American Health Care Act was to give governors like Governor Bevin the flexibility that he has asked for to innovate in the expansion population and to require work as a condition for receiving benefits for those able-bodied, work-capable adults. And that's better for them because it means that they can get on the upward ladder of mobility and find access to work-based insurance that is higher quality, gives them more choices of doctors, better health plans, and better coverage.
Well, Congressman, as you know, going back for decades now, the age-old question has been the fact that there is going to be cost shifting, that if there are people who are showing up who have no insurance and have no coverage, they will go to the emergency room, they will get care, and then that will one way or the other be shifted to those who do have insurance. The price will simply go up.
Well, the defenders of Obamacare have cited increased coverage numbers as the sole metric of success. And the sad reality, again, is that access to a medical card, access to nominal coverage, does not necessarily mean access to health care. And what we need to do is get to a better system where people actually have opportunity to get health plans that are right for them, and make sure that states have the ability to customize Medicaid so that it targets the unique needs of their individual vulnerable patient populations. That, I think, is the better way to go on health care. And I think also, when you look at the CBO score of our health care bill that everybody cites as reducing coverage, here's what you need to know about what the report actually says. What the report actually says is that Obamacare is so unpopular, deductibles are so high, there are so few plans with broad networks, there are so few choices of physicians, that people are willing to pay the penalty as opposed to get the Obamacare plans. And people, without government coercion, without the individual mandate tax, people will choose not to purchase these bad Obamacare policies.
If the president stops payments or goes for this, shifts out these reductions that are supposedly in the current law, and those payments stop, this could affect the markets, certainly hospitals and so forth. Would you support him on that if it is to put the point on the spear?
Well, I agree. Look, I was part of the lawsuit that sued the prior administration for spending without congressional appropriations. A federal court struck down the executive branch's authority to spend money without congressional appropriations. I agree with that decision. And so this president, just like any president, is well within his authority, in fact required, to not spend money without congressional appropriations. And I oppose all bailouts. I don't think the solution to our health care problem is to bail out large insurance companies. That's not the solution. The solution is patient-centered reform that gives people more choices, that reduces cost, and that lowers the cost of health care without growing government. That's the answer, not throwing more hard-earned tax dollars at insurance companies.
Do you think health care gets back on the front burner before the end of this year?
Well, like I said, these problems with premiums going up, with choices going away, with the marketplaces collapsing, those problems are not going away. And that's why I say the Senate is ultimately going to act. And let me just say this, Bill. I would absolutely welcome a bipartisan bill back from the Senate, because this should be a bipartisan effort. Obamacare failed because it was not a bipartisan effort. It's not a durable law because not a single Republican supported it. It was a hyper-partisan bill that never had the support of the American people.
But so is the replacement, right?
So,
it's just the other party.
But what I would say is I welcome the bipartisan input, but I also would say that whatever bill comes back from the Senate, I'm only going to support legislation that actually fixes the problem. I hope that it can be a bipartisan effort, but the bipartisan effort has to lower cost. I'm willing to compromise, of course, but we've got to provide relief. This is a rescue mission for the American people. We have to provide relief in terms of lower costs.
Will House Republicans open up and talk with the Democrats?
I have always done that, and I'm in a bipartisan breakfast meeting every week. We do talk about bipartisan solutions, but again, a bipartisan bill that comes back from the Senate, I may vote for that, but I may not, depending on what's in it. The key is it has to lower cost, it has to expand. It has to expand choices for the American people. It has to address the sustainability of Medicaid. It obviously needs to end this practice of discouraging work through the employer mandate. It needs we need to repeal the individual mandate, which is coercing people to buy insurance that they don't want, that's not good for them. And it also obviously has to address some of the problems associated with the taxes, the innovation-destroying taxes in Obamacare. We need to repeal the medical device tax that destroys medical innovation.
Leads on to our next set of questions about the tax reform, and we'll be back with Kentucky Congressman Andy Barr here on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in just a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We have with us today Congressman Andy Barr, Republican in Kentucky's 6th District. We'll continue our discussion. There was a deal worked out to keep the government operating until September. Do we face the prospect, in your view, of a shutdown next month?
No, in fact, we were able in the House right before the August district work period to pass a big appropriations bill, Make America Secure appropriations bill that included Homeland Security, the VA MILCON, the DOD appropriations bill, legislative branch. A large portion of all of the appropriations bills we passed, and addressing the readiness crisis in the military, reforming the VA, addressing a lot of the challenges facing our country. That bill is over in the Senate, and I think we're making good progress on the appropriations process.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the President say tax reform is next, and neither of them wants to see that go down in flames as the health care situation has. What are the key elements that you want to see in a tax bill that may be put together? Well,
we've been working parallel track with health care and regulatory relief and financial regulatory reform all the way since the beginning. We are ready for tax reform starting after Labor Day. A major hurdle was cleared last week when the President, the administration, the Senate Finance Committee, and the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and the Speaker of the House came to agreement that they were going to jettison the border adjustment tax, an idea that I fought because it would have hurt Toyota and other importers in central Kentucky. Now that that decision is now put aside, we're now moving forward in unison, the White House, the Senate, and the House, on some basic core principles. And the message for the people of America is that we're going bold, we're going permanent, and we're going now. And I'm very optimistic about the prospects of comprehensive tax reform. We haven't achieved this in 31 years, and we have a broken tax code. One of my former colleagues famously said that the tax code today is 3 times the length of the Bible with none of the good news. And that is very, very true.
Well, some might say bold would be something like a flat tax, or the proposals over the years to be able to do your taxes on a postcard. I mean, can it really be that simple?
Yes, it can. And in fact, for 9 out of 10 families in America, when we enact this tax reform, 9 out of 10 families will, in fact, be able to file their tax returns on a postcard-style form.
Does that require getting rid of near and dear exemptions that many people enjoy, such as home mortgage?
Well, home mortgage deduction and charitable deductions we're going to be able to keep, but we're going to double the standard deduction. And that's why it's going to be very easy for most families to file on a simple postcard. For businesses and American competitiveness, we're going to lower the corporate rate from 35 down to the low 20s, if not 20%, because we have the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world. Combined with our broken worldwide tax system, which taxes our global companies when they try to bring their revenue back and repatriate it from overseas, that makes us very non-competitive. That's why you've seen an average of 6 major U.S. corporations move their headquarters overseas over the last several years. So we're not only going to lower the corporate rate, we're going to move to what's called a territorial tax system, which allows U.S. companies with operations and earnings overseas to repatriate that money, create jobs, bring jobs back to the United States, and make the United States more competitive. And probably even more importantly, Bill, is we're going to address pass-through entities, small businesses, the job creators, the entrepreneurs, the sole proprietors, the LLCs. Those are the dynamic companies that create half of the jobs in this country. And many of them, because they're pass-through entities, they pay their taxes at 44.6%. Nearly half of their business income goes to Uncle Sam, and that is simply non-competitive. And that's why new business formation is at a generational low. So what we propose to do is tax them also at a lower rate, equal to what these so-called C corporations, the large corporations, make sure that their business-related income is taxed at the same level, and then for their pass-through entity taxed at their ordinary income tax rate.
You know, Congressman, Wall Street seems to be paying little attention to all the drama in Washington that is captivating so many Americans, with the numbers continuing to climb on the market. So what do you attribute that to?
Well, as a member of the House Financial Services Committee and the new chairman of the Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee, we monitor these financial markets. I've had many conversations with Fed Chair Yellen about the economy, about financial markets, about financial stability and regulation issues. But what Warren Buffett always has said is that the markets vote for a policy agenda in the short term, and then they weigh that policy agenda in the long term. Clearly, the markets are voting for this agenda. Much of the regulatory relief agenda has already been enacted, and the markets are rallying. They're welcoming that. Record high after record high. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, the NASDAQ Composite, all way up, historic record highs, because the market, the collective wisdom of the market, is voting for this pro-growth agenda. And much of that pro-growth agenda, as I said before, has already been enacted. The House of Representatives has passed into law, signed into law, 14 Congressional Review Act disapprovals, invalidating Obama-era regulations. That's lifted the markets. That's given certainty to job creators. In addition, the prospect of comprehensive tax reform and making our tax code more competitive is rallying the markets. But in the long run, we have to deliver on some of these policy changes, not just the regulatory relief agenda, but also the tax reform agenda to sustain economic growth.
As chair of that Monetary Policy and Trade Subcommittee, you obviously can use a policy as a tool. You were supportive of the sanctions bill signed by the president that takes aim at North Korea, Iran, and Russia. Though he had issues with it, he signed it. Why was that important?
Well, in addition to our jurisdiction over the Federal Reserve System, a lot of people don't know this, but my subcommittee that I chair has the jurisdiction over Treasury's implementation of sanctions. And this was an important sanctions package that we worked on, that we passed in conjunction with my colleague Ed Royce, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. These sanctions on Russia, on Iran, and North Korea are very important. We're not finished on the sanctions with North Korea because these are primary sanctions, preventing U.S. transactions with North Korea. What we need is a second round because of their ballistic missile tests, because of their continued belligerence and their human rights violations and their continued development of their nuclear program. We've had hearings in my subcommittee about the importance of secondary sanctions. That is, sanctioning foreign entities that do business in illicit trade with North Korea. Good example, Chinese middlemen who change their identity and facilitate that illicit trade. The sanctions package that we just passed targets many foreign regimes that use North Korean slave labor to fund the Kim regime. We also need to look at the World Bank, international financial institutions. I just marked up out of my subcommittee a bill to reauthorize and reform the World Bank to prevent American tax dollars and World Bank dollars from supporting regimes that do business with North Korea. We can continue to tighten pressure and put pressure on the North Korea regime with additional sanctions.
And that also is used not only with state entities, but in terrorism efforts. I mean,
absolutely,
freezing the money.
Absolutely.
All right, Congressman Andy Barr is with us. Our other questions, and some of those will be a little political. We're coming back here on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Our final minutes now with Congressman Andy Barr, Republican of Kentucky's 6th District. Congressman, your faint endorsement of Donald Trump for president was basically that he was not Hillary Clinton when you were on our program last. What do you make of the first few months of his presidency?
I support the president, and I support the president's agenda and the vice president's agenda because that agenda is the House Republican agenda. And we have great alignment and interest in promoting this pro-growth agenda. The vice president was in Lexington just a few weeks ago, listening to small business owners talk about their struggles with Obamacare and how it's made life harder for them, their customers, and their employees.
Do you have concerns about any Russian interference in America's election?
I have, well, of course I do. Of course I have concerns about Russian interference in our election. I have concerns about Russian interference in Ukraine. I'm glad that we finally have bipartisan interest in this issue. We didn't have it in the previous administration. In fact, we had red lines that were erased. We had an administration previously that removed missile defense from our NATO allies in Eastern Europe. We had an administration that whispered in Vladimir Putin's ear that, well, we get through the election and then we'll have more flexibility. I am very encouraged that the president signed into law a tough sanctions package punishing Russia for their interference in the election and for their interference in Ukraine.
All right. Two Democrats, at least at this point, will fight it out for the chance to face you. State Senator Reggie Thomas of Lexington, retired Lieutenant Colonel Amy McGrath, who announced on video. Both of them have made it clear they intend to keep their focus on you. Both have said you're too partisan for the district in a seat that has seesawed over the years in terms of it has been held by Republicans and Democrats over the years. Do you plan to answer those accusations?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's important for a leader to listen to constructive criticism, and that's why I'm accessible. That's why we listen to everybody. That's why we meet with everybody. We meet with folks who supported Bernie Sanders and called for a single-payer system. We listen to Tea Party activists. We listen to moderates in the district. There's a lot of diversity in this district. You didn't have a lot of choice
when they came yelling into your meetings, right?
No, and that's not constructive criticism, because nobody can have an adult-like conversation and really listen to one another. And I think the job of a leader is to listen. That's what we're doing. And I do make strong efforts to work in a bipartisan way, working with Democrats like Paul Tunko as my co-chairman of the Congressional Horse Caucus, working across the aisle with Kirsten Sinema, fixing some of the regulatory challenges with manufactured housing in the Financial Services Committee, working on community bank regulatory relief with Democrats on the Financial Services Committee.
Do you expect to face Senator Thomas or Colonel McGrath next year?
I'm just not focused on the internal fight in the Democratic Party, especially a year before the election. My job...
Are you going to give them a year and a half to attack you, though?
No. Look, my job is to do the job I was elected to do. My job is to focus on delivering on the promises that I made when I was campaigning. And if I focus on doing the job I was elected to do, the politics will take care of itself. Now is not the time for politics. Now is the time to do the work of the American people.
Congressman Barr, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Have a good week ahead.